I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast, the show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today I'm joined by Mr. Aaron Gambel. He is a transformational life coach and speaker grounded in one powerful truth. We are not the stories we tell ourselves. After spending 15 years working in the film industry, raising 2 kids, and silently carrying the weight of unresolved trauma and burnout, he has reached a breaking point. He reached a breaking point that changed everything. What followed was the hardest and most beautiful transformation of his life. He went from nearly ending his life to discovering a new purpose rooted in healing, fatherhood, and emotional integrity. Today, he coaches people who are standing at the same threshold, tired of the old patterns and ready to lead their lives with presence, clarity, and truth. Through one-on-one coaching, men's group facilitation, and his upcoming program, Dad Mode Unactivated, he guides people back to themselves to help them dismantle the inner narratives that keep them stuck. So, Aaron, I appreciate you so much for coming on today. Cannot wait to hear your story, and excited for our talk today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's very interesting to hear my bio back to me. Haven't had that in a while.
Well, I mean, it was a very informative bio, and people can hear that and already feel captivated from it. But as I told you earlier and I had mentioned before we got started, I read your even more of the about me section, and it was like very impactful. And I think people are going to really find value in it and really feel touched by it. So, kind of tell me from the beginning how life was starting out for you. Let's kind of go back to the beginning about what childhood was like for you.
Oh man, childhood. I grew up in a very emotionally activated, and I had a pretty rough childhood. Um, my parents were never together. They were divorced. So I was a I joke, I was very similar to Harry Potter in that I was kind of the bastard child in this family with, my dad had remarried and had another child with my stepmom. And I was kind of, the odd one out. And it created a lot of what I've now been unpacking, a lot of trauma. I There's an amazing book. I can't remember the name of it. Let me think for a second. Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, that I read, that had a really, really big effect on me and how I tell my story and what I experienced, as a child. My parents are very emotionally immature, and I grew up in an environment where I got real comfortable walking on eggshells and got really good at reading people's sort of energy or people's, facial expressions in order to find out if I say something right now, am I going to get smacked or am I going to get praised? Um, so I like to look at those things as sort of positives to the scenario that I grew up in. But I carried a lot of that trauma with me for many, many years of my life. I spent my 20s and 30s going to college and distracted myself with booze and drugs and alcohol and weed as a coping mechanism in order to avoid actually you know feeling and addressing those sort of demons, I guess you would say, that were following me around.
So a little bit more about kind of the childhood. You said you have a very vulnerable and raw personal story that you share with the world. Do you care to share some of that with my audience? A little bit about some more of your personal story.
Sure. So I am 46 years old, and 3 years before, sorry, let me start that again. Uh, 5 days after my 43rd birthday, I got into a fight with my now ex-wife. Um, and it was a normal fight. I had a regular, at that time, I had a regular life. I was a blue collar worker in the film industry. I had 2 kids and a wife, and I was married. And 5 days after my 43rd birthday, something cracked inside of me. It started with a argument with my ex-wife. Um, and ended in me walking upstairs into my bedroom, grabbing a bottle of Xanax and shaking it and looking inside the bottle and quickly counting about 20, 25 pills inside. And I thought to myself, I could just eat all of these and never wake up. And as I was contemplating downing this bottle of Xanax, an image popped into my mind. And that image was of my 2 kids who were at that time about 5 and 7 years old, downstairs in the living room of my house, laughing and playing Uno. That image is what stopped my arm from lifting that bottle to my mouth. The next thing that I had to do after that was make one of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my entire life as a man. And that was to put myself in the hospital. So I called a friend and I told him that I needed him to give me a ride. And he took me to UCLA Medical Center, where I checked myself into the behavioral health unit. I spent 5 days inside the hospital there. And then the doctors after that suggested that my next steps would be to go to a residential treatment center, sort of like a rehab. Um, and, for a lot of people that were in there, it was like a rehab. But for me, it was a little something different. It's something I like to call my mental health college experience. Because every day that I was there, 6 days a week, every hour on the hour, for 25 days, we had a new facilitator or a new therapist teach us a different modality of psychology. And I leaned in. I mean, I took my notepad and my pen and I walked downstairs every single morning into that decrepit old house, the couch that served as our classroom, and I took copious amounts of notes. And I saved every single piece of paper that they gave us, and I learned nearly every modality of psychology. And I apply all that stuff now today to my coaching and to how I help others. Um, but in that process, I realized that I had lost myself, that I was living a life for someone else. I was checking these boxes that, society deems that we're supposed to do. Kind of like, you get a job and you get married and you have kids and that's what's supposed to make a happy life. And I don't think what they tell you in those sort of societal like norms is that you have to look within and really see what makes you happy and who you are as a person. Like I lost myself in being, being a family man. I on the outside, everything on paper looked amazing, but on the inside, I was drowning. I was not living for me, and I didn't understand, and I couldn't see that I wasn't actually. I'd lost touch with myself, and I was letting these childhood traumas and these things kind of overtake my emotions, and they would, there's this great line, or there's this, I'm sure you've probably heard this, but it's kind of like the definition of masculinity from like the older version of the older generations is that you put your head down, you bury your emotions, you work hard, and you provide for your family. And that's what I was taught, but what happens when you can't bury those emotions anymore? Like, what happens when those things come bubbling up? And for me, that was that moment. They were bubbling up. And that crack, what I explained, walking up into my bedroom, that was the final draw. And that's what told me that I needed to find myself. I needed to figure out what was going on inside of me. And I needed to face that. And I'm still facing it. But if I didn't have that experience of putting myself in the hospital and going to that treatment center and learning so much stuff and having that time to journal every day and really question who am I? What do I like? Like what makes me happy? I probably wouldn't be here today.
So when
And
you were in the hospital, what did your family kind of think? What kind of was your wife's reaction? Which I read what your wife did, which I think is pretty messed up. But tell me and kind of share a little bit about what your wife or ex-wife now did when you were in the hospital.
3 days after 3 days after I entered the hospital, she came to visit me one time only. And it wasn't for support or to check in on me. It was to tell me that she was filing for divorce. And it sounds really kind of cold and a little bit horrible, but I just want to let everyone know that like she was doing what she thought was best in that situation. Doctors and everybody was like, well, if you have something big that you need to tell him, like you should do it now. And that might not have been the best thing. Like, are you familiar with the term the dark night of the soul?
I feel like I've heard of that.
It's kind of like when you hit rock bottom and you're going through the deepest, darkest times of your life. That's where I was. At least that's where I thought I was at that moment. And then when she came and told me that, I just went through the floor. I went, you know, deeper into the rock bottom. I went through rock bottom and then hit molten lava. Uh, because for me, growing up the way that I grew up, which I explained earlier, is being in a divorced household. I always thought that my biggest fear was that if I get a divorce, I'm repeating exactly the same things that happened to me when I was a kid. That somehow my kids would end up with a horrible stepdad, or some sort of situation that they're going to be in where they're going to be treated the same way I was growing up. And that was to me failure. It took me a long time to realize that two happy homes are far better than one toxic home. And once I kind of realized that and understood that what I'm doing, getting out of this relationship and finding myself is so much healthier and so important to my kids, because they're going to grow up in a different environment with a father who is present and who is, you know, aware and is not repeating any of those same things that he experienced.
How did your kids react during this time when you had to go and focus on yourself and get medically help? Did they really, could they have understood what you were going through, or did you try to not introduce your kids to this side of you so early in their life?
They have no idea. Still to this day, they're 10 and 8 years old. They have no clue. Working in the film industry, I often went out of town for several weeks at a time. Like I've, been to Alabama working on a movie, or Memphis, Tennessee, or, Kansas City, or wherever, Oklahoma City. Like I've done movies all over the country. So for me to go do a job and be gone for several weeks was pretty normal in my household. So as far as my kids are concerned, I went off and did a movie, or was working out of town. And that was kind of I felt that was the safest and best way to kind of, you know, let them in on what was, or not, protect them from that thing. And I'm sure I'm going to have that conversation when they're older and let them know what I did, and, and how that changed everything. But I'm going to wait until they're much older to have that conversation.
Do you think it's something that they probably, it would be best if they never knew what happened and kind of keep it to where, um, because is there kind of a fear that they'll look at you differently after you share the story? Kind of, it's like, oh, I was just away on a business trip, when in reality that you were fighting kind of inner demons that you were facing at that time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's any way to not, I mean, I'm doing podcasts and talking about it, and it's out there. So they're going to find out. They're going to hear these stories. They're going to hear my story. And they're going to have questions, and that's okay, because I'm ready to have those I have those answers. I'm ready to have that conversation. And I think I think one of the things that I said in the story that I was telling was that was one of the biggest decisions I ever had to make as a man. I chose to go do that because I needed to help myself, but I needed to help myself so then I could help my kids, so I could be a better father. And I think that that's incredibly important. And it's not something for me. This is my own personal take on this. Is I don't look at it in a shameful way. I look at it in an honorable way. I did what I had to do, and I had to make a huge decision in order to be better. And to me, that's how I like to frame this, as this idea that, I'm doing what I have to do in order to be the best dad I possibly can. It just happened to be going to the hospital.
When you were in the rehab center, people tend to have different experiences when it comes to rehab. Some people go to rehab and they think that it was the most perfect thing in the world, and then some people go and they say that they experienced some of the most outrageous, vivid things that stick with them forever. What was it like kind of going to rehab? Did you get to talk to other people that were kind of having the same struggle as you? And was it kind of like traumatizing in a way, depending on what you had to endure and what you had to go through?
Oh, at first, yes. I mean, I remember getting out of the hospital at a UCLA, and this random middle-aged mom picked me up in a beat up old Honda CRV and drove me to Pasadena, California. And I walked up into this decrepit old house that smelled like a mixture of like mold and musk and, you know, old paint. And I'm really painting a horrible picture, but it was the most shocking experience walking into that place. And when I walked in, there was three guys sitting on a couch in the living room listening to an instructor talk about music and emotions. And as they were checking me in, I'm literally just wearing the hospital scrubs that they had given me in the hospital. I had a bag with the clothes that I walked into the hospital with, and then that was it. And I'm waiting around for them to check me in, and my first thought is, I want to fucking run. And I, for a hot second, thought about like just running, just getting out of there, figuring out like run. I'll figure out how to get back to my house. But then I thought for a second, like, what am I running back to? My old life? I'm completely unhappy where I am. And I'm just going to repeat the same cycles that have been happening for years and years. So I had a honest to God moment of, I can't run. I need to lean into this. But to answer your question a little bit further is, that moment scared the crap out of me. But then once I got there and once I settled in and once I met the people that were also in there and were very similar situations, there was a couple of guys that had a situation that was nearly the same as mine. It was more of like people struggling with mental health issues than actual like drug rehab. There were at one point in the 25 days, there was one guy that came in and he was like detoxing from something. But for the most part, it was all people similar to me that were just like had a breakdown and didn't know what to do. And their family had, helped them into the hospital and helped them get treatment. And it was actually sort of comforting, not understanding that like I'm not alone. Like I'm not alone in this. And that's one of the things that I try to stress with people that I work with now and men that are out there struggling in silence. Like you're not alone. If I can do it, like you can definitely do it. And there's more people that are having those same issues. I run a men's group now, and one of the most amazing moments that happens in these sessions, in these meetings, is when we're going around in a circle and everybody's kind of talking about their own story or whatever the subject may be, and you see a light bulb moment in someone else next to that person who's explaining their story because they realized, wow, I'm going through that also. And to have that moment and have that realization that you're not alone is just, it's a powerful experience to understand that there's multiple people dealing with this. And the fact that you're reaching out to to get help and to grow. I mean, that's honorable in my opinion.
So after you had left the rehab and kind of got out and was back back in the real world and not that, what steps did you take next about did you really have kind of a plan of what you wanted to do, or was it more of a, I got out of rehab, let's just try to take it day by day?
Yeah, I mean, there was a process. I mean, I went back to work. I went back to working in the film industry and was trying to figure out. That ended, in a divorce. So that was a big upheaval in my life where now I'm, have to figure out where I'm going to live and, and all those things. And once the dust settled a little bit on that stuff, um, and I started to settle into some, somewhat normalcy, I started realizing that the life that I'm living even now is a little bit better, but I'm just not happy. And I randomly took a public speaking course. I'll never forget this. And the idea was that I really felt compelled to share my story. And that public speaking or that sort of like TED Talk masterclass helped me to dial in a speech that really outlines what my experience was and my shift. And in researching and writing that speech, I came across an incredible statistic: is that in 2022, the second leading cause of death for men 45 and under is suicide. The number one leading cause of death is unintentional injury. That means anything something could fall out of the sky and hit you and die. You could have a brain aneurysm. You could get bit by a rattlesnake or some poisonous, animal and die. And it's a large culmination of causes of death that is just slightly above suicide. And to me, that shook me. I was almost one of those statistics. Like I was very close to being one of those statistics. And that kind of changed my perspective. And that helped me realize that I actually have an experience. I have a story and I can tell that story. And that maybe somebody out there who happens to be listening and is on that sort of tip of considering that will shift and go seek out some help. Reach out to me or reach out to a mental health person or go do what I did and put themselves in the hospital. I mean, that's when I decided that the film industry wasn't for me anymore and that I need to step into sharing my story and coaching and helping others, helping other men sort of look into their own past and look into why the past is sort of locking them in. I teach breaking away from the past and to reclaim your power because, you know, we aren't the stories that we tell ourselves. Our brain is interesting. It's an interesting mechanism.
So, what does it really mean to be emotionally present, to be an emotionally present man in today's world, and why does it matter more than ever?
That is a great question. To be emotionally present is to understand the emotions that are going on in your body and in your mind and allowing those emotions to happen with allowing those emotions to happen and sort of riding the wave of that emotion in order to regulate yourself. And I think that that's really important these days because, they nobody really teaches that. At least in my generation, I can really only speak for myself, is that I never got taught how to manage your emotions. And I think what society deems men in particular is like we're not actually not allowed to express any emotion. Anger is the only emotion that is slightly expected and not necessarily accepted for a man to express. You're not supposed to cry or be sad otherwise they call you all kinds of names that you're not a man if you're doing that. Like that's complete bullshit to me. And I used to feel that way. Like I grew up on a ranch, like a, country boy, where a man's man. You dig ditches and, you know, wear cowboy boots and all that kind of stuff. And I think one of the biggest things that I like to really teach is that as men, we want to fix all the time. That's inherently what we do. You have a problem? Okay, let's fix it. Here's all kinds of solutions that we can come up with to fix this problem. But what we really need to do is really need to work on and really practice not fixing, but feeling. So what I always say is like as men, we need to get out of our heads and into our hearts, because that's where you feel, is with your heart. And that doesn't make you any less of a man. It actually makes you more of a man as far as I'm concerned, because if you can feel your emotions and you can empathize with somebody else or with that partner or whoever it may be, that's a well-rounded human being.
A lot of men can hear this episode and feel very empowered by. I think you're a good leading example of how you can break the norm of how men are supposed to act. I had the same mindset as you growing up too. It was looked down upon if men showed any emotion. It was looked down upon if men had a sad day, because it would ruin their image and persona that they're supposed to portray to the world. And it's supposed to be nothing gets us down. We're supposed to be tough skinned guys, and even if we have some of the darkest things happen to us, we don't let anything break us down. And in reality, it's not true. That how There's a high probable chance that most of the men that perceive themselves to be very manly are secretly and deep down dealing with some really dark stuff, but they can't showcase it because of this image and persona that people have just portrayed us to be. And I think it's people like you to help raise awareness to these men that say, look, I went through some dark stuff growing up and I talk about it. I don't feel shameful about it. I don't feel guilty about doing it. I do it because it helps me and and it will help other people. And there's so many dads that are coming up and probably have questions. So, what advice do you have for new or soon to be dads who want to prepare for fatherhood, but they're not quite sure what to do, and in what ways does that support their own growth as men today?
That's a great question. The advice I would give to new and soon to be dads is, one, to be present. To be present. You know, babies from the youngest age are looking for a connection. Early on, they're reading you early on. And a present and available dad is going to make a huge difference in a child's life. The other thing that I would say is do your own work. look into what's going on in your past. What are some of those things that may have you may have been or they may have been pushing aside? Because when you can show up fully for yourself, then you can show up fully for that family that you're about to create. Another thing that I would say is, and this is a big one that I didn't learn until after I got a divorce, is to learn how to ask what support looks like for your partner. Again, going back to that sort of like we're fixers, right? Men, we want to take a problem and fix it. And a lot of times what happens is you have your partner who is just had a baby or whatever or is about to have a baby and they are looking for support. It's your job to be supportive, but it's also your job to ask. What we'll do is we'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to wash the dishes and I'm going to do these things that I don't normally do because that's what support looks like. But that support, those washing the dishes, that might not be what makes that partner feel supported. So being able to just take a second and say, hey, what would it look like for you to feel supported? What can I do that would make you feel supported in this relationship? And that gives agency to that person to go, wow, he really wants to support me. And then he's going to do the things that I actually ask without, instead of just assuming, oh, washing dishes is what support is. So that would be the first three. And there's a bunch of others that I have that if anybody's really interested, we can dive a little bit more into the Dad Mode Activated program. But those would be the top.
As you had mentioned earlier about your kids, you had mentioned that um, you were going to wait till they're older enough to kind of go back and tell them about what happened. What exactly do you wish for them, and how do you kind of tell them? And because kids will probably someone in their circle maybe one day in the future will listen to podcasts and find this podcast or another podcast you've been guest on, and they hear their father tell them about the story. How do you kind of tell your kids about everything that's happened to you, and how do you tell them about keeping them protected to where they don't fall down the same path and kind of experiencing things you did?
Yeah. My kids are 10 and 8 now. So it's still a little early for them. I think they'll be, a few years before they really start diving in or stuff comes up about me. But I'm sure they're gonna look. They're gonna, once they get a little bit more access to phones and computers and things like that, they're gonna do the research, right? And when that time comes, I'm going to have the honest conversation with them. I said, listen, like I did this for myself, but I also did this for them in order to, I think it's important that, you know, it's kind of like have you ever heard the airplane analogy?
Extend on that because I don't think I'm familiar with that.
I'll go ahead and explain it. So when you go on an airplane, the stewardess always talks about, every time you go on an airplane, they do the example where the oxygen mask pops down from the top, right? And they always say
Yes.
you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you put the oxygen mask on the person next to you, right? So that idea, that analogy means that you have to take care of yourself fully before you can take care of someone else. Because you can't take care of someone else if you haven't put that oxygen mask on yourself. So for me, in talking to my kids, like it's incredibly important. I'll tell them like it's important that I took care of myself. I had to make the hardest decision I have ever made as a man in order to take care of myself so I can be the best dad for you. And so you don't actually have to repeat those same things that happened to me when I grew up. All of that stuff stops with me. And we're not, and they're gonna understand. I believe they're gonna understand what that means and what I've done because I'm an incredibly involved dad, and I've shifted my life and my career in order to be more present of a father. And I'm creating a fatherhood program in order to help other men be more present and attained fathers and to understand what support means and how to ask for support when you need it. That's why I have men's groups. It's teaching men and helping modeling to men that we should have a support system. We should have people that you can call upon when you're struggling to to be there for you. Just even if it's just a check-in, a conversation, So I, I think I'm not looking forward to having that conversation with my kids, but I think when I do have that conversation, it's uh it's going to be done in a way that I think they'll understand that this was the best thing that I could have done for myself and for them.
What future goals do you have for yourself? Has there been anything that, um, which you've accomplished so much in your lifetime now, from surviving rehab, changing your life for the better, moving on from your ex-wife. But is there still anything that's on your bucket list that you would like to still try to achieve, or do you feel like you've kind of have achieved everything? It's just kind of now sitting back and just seeing where the wind takes you.
Oh, I've got so many things that I want to achieve. I want to lower that statistic of men. I want the suicide to be not on the list of the most causes of male death. I want to create a system where we change the paradigm of how society sees masculinity. I want it to be okay for a man to say, "Hey, I'm not doing well right now," and that not to be looked at as being called a pussy or a not a masculine man. Like I want to change the social view of masculinity and what healthy masculinity looks like, because I think that can help change so many, like it can help change society. Like we have a bunch of men who are in touch with their emotions and can communicate and learn to actually like express themselves in a healthy way. That's a different world. And these are pretty lofty goals, but I'm doing that right now, one day at a time.
I think it is important for this issue to have kind of bring awareness to it, something that a lot of people don't really talk about stuff. And I think for you starting out and kind of helping this, I wanted to say movement, but I know that's not the right word, but kind of this new approach to how men shouldn't be afraid to speak up about personal stuff that's going on. Yeah, I've preached this on multiple podcasts, and I've actually had other men talk about this too. That um, and it stems from that thing I mentioned earlier. Everyone has men are supposed to put on this image. I want people to break that norm because uh, as we kind of have gotten into life, and it changes every day, but I feel like more men tend to open up more now. Now, back probably when my ancestors were living, and especially back in the 80s, 90s, maybe 70s, you could, this wasn't something that a lot of people talked about, and it was really looked down upon. I think it's become more accepted now, but there's still a lot of work. As you said, there's a lot of work to still be done, especially trying to get numbers down when it comes to suicide rates. And that's also another thing that people tend to not think about is, these men, a lot of men do probably one reason why the suicide rate is so high is because men tend to be scared to open up because they're scared to break that image. So their inner thoughts and inner actions lead to consequences due to they were scared to open up and share what they were feeling to the world because what they thought was that it was going to portray them as weak. It was going to portray them as you said as a pussy, and it's something that we've got to stop doing. It's because if we keep doing it, the suicide rate will only increase if it hasn't already.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're touching on something. Um, one of the things that I said in that TED talk, that speech that I had is that we have to understand that, and you kind of touched on it here a little bit, is that, I'm a generation of men, and you're probably not, also in this category. I'm not sure how old you are, Noah. I'll use myself as an example then. I grew up in a generation of men who were raised by war veterans, who were also raised by war veterans, who were all taught to not talk about the things that they experienced when they were at war. So that kind of thinking is what creates and adds to that social programming of men not talking about their emotions. Because we were all taught by the previous generations above us that you don't talk about that stuff. And that's the worst possible thing that you can do. Is we have to talk about it because you can't just let it boil up in your inside of you. Eventually that's going to it's like putting Mentos in a Dr. Pepper or Diet Coke. Like it's going to explode out the top eventually. And unfortunately what ends up happening is it ends up in somebody ending their life. But if we can normalize that and we can normalize talking about our emotions, talking about the things that are going on and having male relationships, friendships, loneliness is one of the biggest things that is plaguing men to this in this day and age. Feeling alone, not connecting with other men or women, but mostly not connecting with other men. Like women have friends, they talk, they it's really normalized that women can, you know, go get coffee and I see it all the time. I work in coffee shops a lot, and you'll see these groups of women come in and they're all just chatting away, talking about all the things that are going on in their life and expressing some emotional stuff. And we're just right in the middle of a coffee shop. And then they get up and they leave and they have, and it's like you don't see a bunch of men all gathering, drinking coffee or whatever, talking about whatever's going on. You may see it at the bar, but like that's not healthy. You're just, getting wasted, like dancing around these things that may be coming up and not actually talking about it. So, normalizing this idea that you can actually talk about these things with your friends and it's safe to communicate, like that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and you kind of had mentioned something that I had not thought about. It's you made a good analogy. I'm happy that you made this point up because I've noticed this too that and it is normalized for women to kind of talk about these things and go to coffee shops and all that, and they go to each other and talk about these problems. You can walk in a store, at a coffee shop, in a mall, and you can see two women sitting down talking that don't. They're friends, and they're talking to one another about life, and we don't really see that as odd. However, if you put two men in place, you get looks. It looks weird that you have two guys hanging out, and especially if it's like at a coffee shop and it's a group of men. People would kind of give you weird looks, and even other men would look at it as odd. It's that societal norm that we have of it just because then it tends to be people will think about are they gay? That's just like that's just the norm that it is. It's just odd. You don't really see guys hanging out with other guys at coffee shops because it just looks like people get ideas and people get these thoughts in their heads. But yet, if it was two women, oh, well, then that's normal. It's such a weird thing to think about, but it's true. And I didn't really think about it until you had mentioned that. So I was like, oh my Lord, that is so true.
It's, it's really interesting is that that's just cultural norm. That's societal programming telling us that it's not comfortable to have a conversation with another with two men to have a conversation. Men should be putting their heads down, burying their emotions, working hard and providing for their families, right? Like it's so stupid. I have a funny story though that kind of adds to this what you were just talking about is when my son's 10 now and when he was born I have this family owned diner in where I live, and a good buddy of mine and my ex wife, he has been going there since he was a kid. So
Mm,
he introduced us to this diner, and we've got to know all the staff and the owner and stuff. And to be honest with you, 10 years later, I still go to the same diner. I take my kids there. But there was this time when my son was first born, and during the week, I would go get breakfast with this friend. And it was our way of me and my other male friend to connect and to catch up and to check in on each other. And, it'd be a Tuesday or Wednesday. And we would do this like every couple of weeks. And I would bring my son with me in the little carrier, in his little stroller and stuff. And we'd sit down and we'd have breakfast and drink coffee and just catch up.
mm,
Well, all the old guys that would eat breakfast in there every single day for the longest time thought that we were a gay couple that just had adopted a baby.
yep. Hmm.
And I got the biggest laugh out of that. But it really just proves that same kind of thing that we're talking about is like, that's that older
Uh,
generation that goes, oh, two men, like men aren't supposed to be caregivers. They're supposed to be providers and they're
mm,
supposed to, only be working and drinking beers with their friends and not like going to a coffee shop with babies. Like,
right.
no, that's only for gay men to do. Like, come
Hmm.
on, like, get out of here. Like, that's such like, it's so,
It's bullshit.
it's such bullshit. It really is. Like, like that is not, like, that's not how in this day and age, like,
Yeah.
like, that's not, like, and also, even if I was gay and that was my partner and I had a kid, who fucking cares? Like, like but going back to like what you're kind of saying is like that's cultural norms. That right
Yeah.
there is the perfect example of the judgment that happens by society because of the expectations of a man and what a man should be doing.
Yeah, and in other parts of the world, people, because my show does is worldwide. I do have people from other countries that listen. People from other countries listening to this could think, really? That's how it is here? And then there's in other parts of the country, maybe this is not normalized. Maybe it is a thing where people don't judge anyone. I've I've had interviews with people that have been from different countries that or that live in different countries now that is completely different than how we are here in the States. And like I had actually just posted an episode as we're recording this today of someone that lives in Thailand that said that we were talking about smiling and how if you put a smile on your face that it releases endorphins and helps you have a better mood. That in Thailand, that it's normalized for people to smile at one another because that's just how everyone is here. But yet, if you do it here in the States, people think that you want something or they think that you're just crazy. And I said, absolutely. absolutely right. And I think it's this thing with that. Um, we're kind of getting close to time, but I appreciate this viewpoint that you had brought up because it's something that I think does get buried down in the dirt and doesn't get dug up again. I think it's something that a lot of people need to hear because this is something that does still happen to this day, which, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's gotten a little bit more accepting and it's a little bit more free, but it's still an issue that happens in other parts of the country and probably in other parts of the world. It happens still. Um, for people that want to follow you and kind of keep up with your story, because I think that this is such a impactful story, and I think you've still got so much to prove and have so much more to give. If people would like to keep in touch with you and get in contact with you and follow you on this journey, where can they all find you at?
I'm pretty active on Instagram. It's Aaron, Aaron M, Gamble, Gambel. I also am on TikTok. I have a website as well at aarongamble.com. And if anyone's interested in my fatherhood program or it liked what they, what they heard about that, I'm going to be launching a cohort for that really soon.
I will put off his links in the description box below about his website and his social media accounts, and feel free to definitely check out the fatherhood program when it comes out. Just feel free to make sure to check his website and social media accounts as well to keep updates about when that program comes out. Feel free to follow me on social media as well: Instagram, TikTok at Lethal Venom Podcast, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast. And as always, listen to Lethal Venom wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm available on all the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora. It's everywhere, so feel free to follow it so you get notified when new episodes come out. Appreciate you all so much for tuning in today's episode. Y'all hope you all have a great rest of your day and week. Be safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Lethal Venom.